The Alpha King called her a nobody. Moments later, every elder rose to honor her true bloodline. The kitchen smelled of burnt rosemary and old stone. Elira Voss knelt by the hearth, scrubbing a pot that had already been scrubbed twice that morning, because the head cook liked to see hands moving, even when there was nothing left to clean. She did not mind. Busy hands meant no one looked too closely at her face. 3 years she had lived inside these walls. 3 years of carrying trays, folding linens, and answering to a name that was not truly hers. Elira had learned the value of being forgettable. A forgettable girl was a safe girl. She kept her eyes down, her voice soft, and her past locked somewhere even she tried not to visit. But that morning, the castle was not calm. Servants moved faster than usual, voices low and urgent. The Emberlin delegation was arriving before sunset, and the Alpha King wanted everything perfect. Perfect food, perfect silence, perfect obedience. You, the head cook snapped, pointing a wooden spoon at Elira, you will serve the wine in the main hall tonight. Don't spill. Don't speak. Don't even breathe too loud. Elira nodded and said nothing, though something cold moved through her chest. The main hall meant standing close to the throne, close to Draven Ashworth, the Alpha King of Frostmark, whose temper was known to snap faster than dry wood in a fire. She had avoided that room for 3 years. Tonight, she would not have the choice. By evening, the hall glowed with candlelight and tension. Long tables stretched beneath high stone arches, each seat filled with nobles dressed in fur-lined robes, their faces polite but watchful. At the head of the room, Draven sat upon a chair carved from black oak, his presence heavy even in stillness. He did not smile. He rarely did. The Emberlin elders entered soon after, a small group of aging men and women whose steps were slow, but whose eyes missed nothing. Among them was a woman with silver hair and clouded eyes, walking with a carved wooden cane. She moved as if she had already seen every kind of room like this one, and none of them had impressed her. Elira kept to the shadows near the wall, pitcher in hand, waiting for her moment to pour. She watched the elders take their seats, watched Draven greet them with careful, measured words, the kind used when peace is thin and easily broken. The meal began. Servants moved quietly between tables, refilling cups, clearing plates, disappearing the moment their task was done. Elira followed the same rhythm, pouring wine for guest after guest, murmuring nothing, meeting no one's eyes. She reached the elders' table, just as the silver-haired woman lifted her cup toward her, waiting. Elira poured carefully, focused entirely on the thin stream of dark wine, on not spilling a single drop onto the white cloth. That was when Draven's voice cut through the hall. "Where is my wine?" Elira froze. She had lost track of time near the elders' table, and his cup sat empty. She turned quickly, pitcher still in hand, and hurried toward the head of the hall. But hurrying was a mistake. Her foot caught the edge of a rug, and a small splash of wine landed on the stone floor before she caught herself. The room went quiet. Draven's eyes locked onto her, sharp and unreadable. "You dare keep me waiting," he said, his voice calm in the way that made people more afraid than shouting ever could. "While you gossip with old women who barely remember their own names." Elira lowered her head. "Forgive me, my lord. It will not happen again." "It already has." He leaned back in his chair, studying her the way one studies an insect before deciding whether it is worth stepping on. "Do you even know who you are? A nobody? A servant with no name worth remembering? You should be grateful I allow you in this room at all." The words landed hard, but Elira had trained herself for years to absorb such blows without flinching. She bowed her head lower. "Yes, my lord." She expected the moment to pass, the way it always had. She expected the nobles to return to their meals, the conversation to move on, the humiliation to fade quietly into the corners of the room. Instead, something else happened. The silver-haired elder rose from her seat. The movement was slow, deliberate, and it drew every eye in the hall. Her cane tapped once against the stone floor as she straightened to her full height, which was not tall, but somehow filled the room all the same. "Say that name again," the elder said, her voice steady despite its age. "The one you just gave her." Draven's brow lifted, more curious than concerned. "I said she is nobody, a servant, nothing more." "No," the elder said, "not nobody." She turned toward Elira, and for the first time in 3 years, someone looked at her not as a girl who poured wine, but as something else entirely, something the elder recognized. "Elira," the woman said softly, testing the name like a familiar taste. "Elira Voss." The hall stirred. Whispers moved between tables like wind through dry grass. Elira felt her pulse rise into her throat. She had buried that name so carefully, had let it sink beneath 3 years of quiet servitude. Hearing it spoken aloud, in this hall, in front of the Alpha King, felt like watching a door she had locked long ago swing open on its own. "You are mistaken," Elira said quickly, though her voice did not sound as certain as she wanted it to. "I am only a servant here." The elder shook her head slowly. "I do not forget faces, child. Not faces like yours, not eyes like your mother's." Another elder rose, then a third. One by one, the Emberlyn delegation stood from their seats, their movements slow but sure, their eyes fixed not on their host, the Alpha King, but on the servant girl standing near the wall with a pitcher of wine trembling slightly in her hands. Draven's confidence faltered for the first time that evening. What is the meaning of this? The silver-haired elder did not look at him. She kept her gaze on Elira. 12 years ago, the Voss bloodline was said to have ended, wiped out in the purge that many in this room prefer not to remember. It was a bloodline older than this castle. Older even than the throne you sit upon now. The words settled over the hall like a heavy blanket. Elira felt every eye turned toward her, and for the first time in years, she could not disappear into the background. There was nowhere left to hide. "The purge," Draven repeated, his voice quieter now. "That bloodline was ended by my father's order. There were no survivors." "There was one," the elder said. "A child, hidden and protected, raised in silence, so she might live long enough to be forgotten by those who wished her dead." Elira's hands shook. The pitcher slipped slightly, and she gripped it tighter, though her mind was no longer on the wine at all. She had spent 3 years convincing herself that the past was buried, that if she stayed quiet enough, small enough, invisible enough, she could simply exist without ever being found. She had not imagined it would end like this, not with elders rising in a room full of candlelight, not with her name spoken like a title rather than a whisper. "You called her nobody," the elder said, finally turning her clouded eyes toward Draven, "but her line predates yours. Her family ruled before the Ashworth name was carved into any throne. If the old laws still mean anything in this hall, then it is not she who owes you respect. It is you who owes her recognition." The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of understanding, settling slowly over people who had spent their whole lives believing a certain story about power, and were now realizing that story had a hole in it they had never noticed. Draven rose slowly from his seat, his eyes never leaving Elira. "Is this true?" Elira did not answer right away. Her heart pounded loud enough that she was certain the whole room could hear it. She thought of her mother's face, blurred now by years of trying not to remember it. She thought of the small locket she kept hidden beneath her uniform, the one item she had carried out of her old life and never once dared to show anyone. Slowly, she reached beneath the collar of her servant's dress and pulled it free. A small silver locket, engraved with a crest few in the room had seen in over a decade. She held it up, not as proof to convince him, but simply because there was nothing left to hide. The elder nodded once, as if she had expected nothing less. "The Voss crest," she said. "I would know it anywhere." Draven stared at the locket, then at Elira, his expression unreadable in a way that suggested even he did not fully understand what he was feeling. Power was a strange thing. It could make a man forget that thrones were built on top of older thrones, that names erased from record books did not always disappear from memory. "Why did you not speak of this?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. "Because speaking of it would have gotten me killed," Elira said simply. "Silence kept me alive. It seemed a fair trade." The hall remained still, waiting to see what the Alpha King would do with information that changed everything, and nothing all at once. Elira was still a servant in his castle. She was also, apparently, the last living heir of a bloodline older than his own crown. Draven did not apologize. He did not smile either. He simply looked at her for a long moment, the way one looks at a puzzle that has suddenly revealed a missing piece. "You will not serve wine in this hall again," he said finally. Elira's chest tightened, unsure whether this was a punishment or something else entirely. "Not as a servant," he added. "Whatever else this means, you will not stand in the shadows of my hall again." He did not explain further. He did not need to. The elders remained standing, a quiet, unmistakable show of respect, directed not at their host, but at the young woman holding an old silver locket, like it was the only solid thing left in a room that had just shifted beneath everyone's feet. Elira set the pitcher down on the nearest table, her hands finally steady. She did not bow. She did not apologize again. She simply held the elder's gaze, then Draven's, and let the silence speak for her in a way words never could. Whatever came next, she would not be pouring wine in the shadows. Whatever came next, the girl who had spent 3 years disappearing had just become impossible to forget. The Emberlin elders took their seats once more, murmuring quietly among themselves, their earlier reverence lingering in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Servants at the far end of the hall exchanged uncertain glances, unsure how to treat someone they had shared quarters with only that morning. Draven remained standing a moment longer than necessary, his eyes fixed on the locket now resting in Elira's palm. Whatever calculations moved behind his expression, he kept them to himself. A king who built his rule on the assumption that certain bloodlines no longer existed, now had to reconsider what his throne actually stood upon. Elira turned and walked toward the great doors at the end of the hall, her steps steady, despite the weight of every gaze following her. She did not look back. She did not need to. The story that had followed her in silence for 3 years had finally caught up to her in the open, and there was no more room left to hide it. Behind her, the Alpha King remained at the head of his hall, staring at the doors long after they closed, already beginning to understand that the ground beneath his throne was not as solid as he once believed.